Before I begin, this year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, Ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. Okay, tonight, which is interesting, is Lag BaOmer. Tonight is Lag BaOmer. So I thought that it would be nice to speak about Lag BaOmer, because Lag BaOmer is a very interesting commemoration. And a lot of people, don't really realize, to them, Lag BaOmer is Hadlaka, is fire, because that's really what's commemorated throughout the world, actually, wherever Jewish communities are. People light bonfires and they dance. Maybe there's a su'uda. Some places actually have a meal. So there are all kinds of joy, simcha, festivities, and so on. But we have to ask ourselves, what really is the essential idea of Lag BaOmer? And whenever we think about something, you always have to think about something in its context. In other words, not only what is this, but how does it relate to other ideas which form part of the framework, part of the picture. That's also very important, because that context gives you a much greater perspective than if you just look at the idea itself, you see. So that's really what I want to do. I want to place Lag BaOmer not only to understand what it really is, but also within its context of how does it relate to other areas of Hashkafa, which are very fundamental. Now, what's interesting is that, I've discussed different ideas over the years. In fact, what's interesting is, first of all, what's interesting now is that I'm doing it on video. So I think we finally figured out more or less how to do the video. So hopefully I will be able to bring, in the future, the Shiur on the video. So that's number one, But we've gone over many ideas over the years and so on, The trick many times is, people who have listened to all these shurim over the years have accumulated an enormous amount of information. And many people, they don't realize how much information they know. So in many ways, it's like mathematics. If you learn mathematics, you don't go into an area in and of itself independent of any other area of mathematics. All mathematics is connected. It's all related. Well, a similar idea in Hashkafa. Many ideas come together in Hashkafa, and they can be applied individually to different areas, but they're all basically seen in the same context, the same concepts that form the framework. So I want to talk about Lag BaOmer, and we can ask certain questions. The first thing I wanted to ask is, why is Lag BaOmer commemorated of the yahrzeit of Rachel Imenu and Reb Shimon? In fact, they're basically the only two yahrzeits of our previous ancestors that is commemorated. I mean, Rachel Imenu, her yahrzeit is Yud Aleph Cheshvan, and thousands of people go to her grave on that Yud Aleph Cheshvan. And the same thing with Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a Tana, Rachel Imenu obviously is one of the Imors, the matriarchs. Reb Shimon is one of the Tanoim, one of the greatest of the Tanoim, and yet everybody seems to have this real close affinity to Reb Shimon. People wonder, why? So we can ask that question. Why Reb Shimon and why Rachel? What meaning does it have? Second thing we can ask is, what is the real meaning of Lag BaOmer? You see? And most people have, like I said, the idea, it's festivities and so on. But how many people really understand what is really going on? And that's what I'd like to talk about. Also, why is Lag BaOmer commemorated with Hadlaka, which is lighting a bonfire? I mean, that seems to be the essential idea, because everybody does it. They have this huge bonfire, especially in Meron, where Reb Shimon is buried. There are many, I think there's a couple of hundred, whatever they have, bonfires, So that's the question. Clearly then, the bonfire is clearly connected to its essential message or its essential meaning. So that is the question, you see. Now, what it really has to do, Lag BaOmer, is something which is very fundamental to Judaism. Now, interestingly enough, I mentioned this, I think, even last week, that Judaism is not just a religion where you have certain observances and then you get some type of reward, you see. What God has contemplated, and which He does, is that the payoff or the reward or whatever that you get if you do observe Judaism is you become different. You change. It's not that you get to eat a bigger ice cream, something external to yourself, but something happens to you existentially, and something happens to the environment itself existentially. In other words, there's a true transformation that happens as a result. So Judaism, in many ways, is the trigger or the wherewithal how there's actually a change in existence itself. And since God, which I once gave a shiur about, is existence itself, clearly He can create, probably if He wants, an infinite amount of different types of existences that we don't even have any kind of comprehension about. And what He has done is that He has basically, and I've mentioned this, I think, even last week, and it's very important, He has created 5 existential states to the creation itself, you see. Now, each existential state is a framework, is an essential scaffold, if you want to use that word, to an existential state that exists more superficially. Now that means that there are 5 existential states, but each of them forms an essential framework to one which is more superficial. So they are connected in that way. There is some type of an existential connection, but there are 5 different ones, you see, and each one has its own meaning. And since each one, existential state, is really an inner framework of an outer one, right? So therefore each existential state can be called an or pnimi. What's an or pnimi? A hidden or inner light, you see. In a certain sense, you can think of it like science. Science has an or pnimi, The or pnimi of science is matter and energy. And then matter itself is subdivided, and so is energy. But the matter and energy concept is what forms the fabric, right, of the entire physical world. So that's called its inner framework. You see, the or pnimi. Well, Judaism is the same thing. Every existential state has its own or pnimi, which means its own inner reality or inner framework, which gives rise to or somehow brings forth the outer reality, you see. So each existential state is an inner structure to another one, you see. Now I had mentioned what they are, but it's worth repeating because it's so fundamental. The greatest reality of all, of which we have no comprehension in any shape or form, is called the Ein Sof. Then the Ein Sof represents, or is a name of God. Ein Sof means without end, infinite, but that doesn't really describe God as the Ein Sof. We use that word for convenience, because what else are we going to call God, you see? So Ein Sof is some type of existence, some type of entity, right, that has specific characteristics, and that is God. Ein Sof. That is God that we can connect to, which is what I once spoke about. So you have that reality. And then there's a reality which he creates, which is called an other. Because one of the interesting characteristics of Ein Sof is Ein Od Milvado, is besides God there is nothing else. And existentially, really, there can be nothing else. Because the uniqueness of Ein Sof is that it is so unique, it cannot in any way be replicated in any form. So the Rabbi Shem did, and I mentioned what's called Tzimtzum, which means he somehow restricted his presence. It's not literal, it's figurative. And he's able to create what's called a Zulosoi, which means an other. So first he had to conceal the aspect of him that's Ein Od Milvado, means besides God there's nothing else. And then he had to create the concept called Zulosoi, other. And once he created the concept of other, he was able to create beings which are other. And of course, the being that he created in this world of Zulosoi is the Neshama. So the Neshama, the soul, is the greatest of all creations. You see. Now, it's important to know that between Ein Sof and Neshama, there are things which God uses. They're sort of like his operating devices. And these are called spheres. A sphere is in some way some instrument that God uses to do things. And there are 10 spheres, which we know, and so on. And with these spheres, they form the basic mechanism of everything. They give rise to everything. And the first thing that they basically gave rise to is the Neshama. And that comprises the world, the essential world, the fundamental world of Zulosoi. Then after the Ein Sof created that world, which is the world of the Neshama, it created the world of Malachim, Ruchni, spiritual. Now the Neshama is much greater than something spiritual. The Neshama is infinitely greater than Malachim. So that's what it created, the concept of spirituality. Now spirituality, which is interesting, is an entire universe in and of itself. They have their own laws, how they operate, how they exist, just like we have our own laws, how we operate and how we exist. And the two of them cannot interact in a real way. The spiritual world can interact in a certain sense with the physical, but then it has to sort of like not become physical, but it has to don physical garments or some kind of costume where it can then appear in the physical world. But it itself is not physical. It is what's called ruchni, or spiritual. Then what God did is he took the neshama, which is very important, and he enclosed it in geshem, in some type of physical substance. Now, this geshem is not the same physicality that we understand, although it is physical, but it's what's called pure physicality. And God clothed the neshama in pure physicality, you see. And that was how Adam, it's pure, it has no other thing that mingles with it. And Adam HaRishon, the first man, was pure Geshem. But remember that his pure Geshem was not the same as our physicality. But nonetheless, it was not Ruchni, basically. That's the important idea. Now, this enclosure of the neshama by this world of Geshem is a blockage. It's supposed to, in a certain sense, conceal the world of spirituality. It conceals from the neshama the real greater reality called spirituality. And Adam has to act in that way with the belief that there is a spiritual world. He needs to discover this. And when he does, then he himself will turn or transform into a spiritual being. And in many ways, this is what God wants. When Adam will believe and understand and know that the world is really spiritual, that there's a spiritual world above the physical, then the existential state that he will become, right, is spirituality. Therefore, the neshama of Adam, of a man, being physical, when he understands that he is innerly spiritual, he actually becomes that spiritual being. There you are. That's an existential transformation, you see. And that's what eventually happens. Therefore, what do we see? We see that there are different existential states. If each state then is some type of an inner structure of a more inferior state, so there are many opinimis. There are many inner structures. This is what we begin to realize, you know. So if we think about it, there's an opinimi, right? If you're Adam HaRishon and you live in the world of pure Geshem, right? There's no mixture in that. Then what happens as a result of the fact that you live in this Geshem world, your opinimi then is Ruchni. Then the internal structure of the physical world is spiritual, you see. And his purpose is to realize that he is not physical, but he is spiritual, you see. So therefore that's an opinimi. Now the opinimi, the inner structure of the spiritual world, is the world of the neshama itself. It's called the world of the zulosai, you see. And the world of the opinimi, the inner structure of the world of the neshama, is the Ein Sof. So each one forms, you see, an expression of an inner world. So really there are many opinimis, not just one, you see. Now what happened was, which is very interesting, Adam HaRishon was a world called Geshem. So let's call that Olam HaGeshem, you see. But we know the problem was that Adam HaRishon sinned, so he introduced a world which is external to him, which he should not have introduced. He should have gone from a world of Geshem to a world of Ruchni. It would have taken time, but that's what he would become. Instead, what he did is he sinned, and the expression of that sin was that his world of Geshem now became intermingled with the world, lower world, of what's called the Zoyama, or the world of Tumah. You see, the world of contamination or pollution. And that is a world, it's a very interesting kind of existence. It's the world that, like I mentioned, is inhabited by the Satan, the Sitra Achra. And that is a world that is the exact opposite of spirituality. So by him sinning, he sort of like confirmed the existence that a person can sin, that he can have his own will, you see. And since he can have his own will, he imbibed, if you want to use that word, he imbibed in himself a satanic part. Now the Satan, who was an angel, but he is the chief or the head of this world of pollution, you see. And he can project a certain force. It's called a satanic force, and that force is called Zoyama. So therefore, since Adam conformed, right, to the belief that the Satan wants to create or project, what is that belief? That there's other beings besides God. God is not Einod Mavadoi, he's Eshod Mavadoi. That there are many beings besides God, many forces, what's called Koyach Acher, many forces. So he wants to delude man into thinking that he himself, man himself, is a God in a certain sense, and man does not need God, you see. So therefore Adam confirmed that by expressing his will, which was the anti-God, was antagonistic to what God wanted. So he then became intertwined with the world of Zoyama. So that's a new type of existential state called Geshem / Zoyama. So it's Geshem, right? It is Geshem, but it's now intertwined. It is now saturated, right, with Zoyama. Now there's a tremendous difference between Geshem, pure, which was Adam before the sin, and Geshem with Zoyama. We live in a world of Geshem / Zoyama, which is an incredibly contaminated world. It's contaminated with that Zoyama, which is what's called Tumah. And we don't really understand the difference between the two. We have never experienced pure Geshem, but it's a completely different existential state, of which we don't really know what it is. But Adam Rishon, before the sin, that was his world. So now we have a new world, you see? And the problem is that we have to get rid of the Zoyama and revert the world of Geshem / Zoyama back into a world of pure Geshem. You see, and then from pure Geshem, we can now go upward into the world of Ruchni. So this really is the job that we've been doing for thousands of years. This is ever since the sin of Adam, this is really what's been happening. You see. So now you have many existential states, right? You have Ein Sof is 1, the world of Zeloso is 2, Ruchni, spirituality, is 3, Geshem, pure, is 4, and Geshem mingled with Zoyama is 5. So when we now have these 5 existential states, and therefore each one inner to that is its own or primi, you see? So our job basically is to remove the Zoyama from this Geshem, which means we got to get rid of the Zoyama, right? And as a result of that, this world will now turn into a world of pure Geshem, you see, pure physicality, which is not the same as what we have now. It's almost like this world of matter. It's almost like matter, everything that has matter, which is basically everything, becomes pure energy. If you think about it, energy is really matter, right? Before it's condensed or congealed, you see. Nobody knows what energy is. We do know that energy enables you to move, provides movement. It's really what energy is, but nobody knows what it is, you see. But energy is still part of the physical world. So imagine if all matter now became pure energy. We would certainly look different, you see. But that's really what energy is. Energy is the closest thing we can come to pure matter. It's when energy develops into matter. That's the concept of physicality that we know of, right? And that's really, in the end, what deteriorates is the matter. So that's one way of handling it, by thinking the energy is pure Geshem when the matter turns back into energy. Anyway, so we now have this idea that there are many existential states, which I've mentioned, 5 now. Certainly as a sin of sin of Adam Harishon. And the job is to go from one existential state to another. But what's interesting is each one provides an or pnimi. It provides an inner structure. So we really move from one reality to the other reality. That's really the job of the Jew. That's the tikkun of the Jew. To go from one reality to the next reality. You see? So we have these shifts. We go from the world of Geshem / Zoyama into the world of pure Geshem, into the world of Ruchni, into the world of really Olam Haba. In Kabbalah it's called Adam Kadmoin, primordial man. And that world is a very interesting world because that gets closer and closer to its Or Pnimi, and the Or Pnimi of Olam Haba is the Ein Sof. Very interesting, isn't it? That we actually, in that world, we begin to approach the Ein Sof itself. You see, not that we become God, but in some way which we do not understand, we become God-like to the greatest possible ways. And there's a remez to this, which I want to point out. And the remez is this, is if you look at the Shiur Shel Yom Shlishi, the song that we sing after Aleinu by Shachris, Tfilah Shachris, it's talking here about judges, but it alludes to mankind in general. Here's what it says, which is interesting. You see? Ani umarti, I say, Elohim atem, you are God. Elohim means God, right? You are gods. He's talking to man. Ubnei Elyon kulchem, and you, all of you, are really part of the upper spheres. However, ochein, truly, ka'odam temusen, but you all will die as man. Uki achar aserm tipoilu, and you all will fall as the princes. And it actually says, Elohim atem, you are all gods. Like, what does that mean? Because in the end, the neshama is the closest thing to the spheres, those instruments that God uses that represent Him to do things. You see. So therefore, we are, in that sense, God. I can't say we're God, of course not, but we are certainly God-like. That's really what Olam Haba is. It is the return or the reversal of a neshama, which is the world of Zulosoi, other, to get closer and closer to God, which is an Einoid Milvadoi. Besides God, there's nothing else. You see. So in that world, there are many things, features that we're not really aware of, but we become God-like. You see, and that's what the meaning is. Chelik l'kaim yimal. We are part of the living God. You see, now we're not God, we're part, but a part of something, obviously, is some type of component of that thing. So if that's the case, we certainly are God-like. In fact, that's probably the closest thing that we can say. You see? So this is the basic context of all of this. So it's not that we have only another reality to look at. We have 4 other realities. The reality of pure Geshem, the reality of Ruchni, spirituality, the reality of pure Neshama, which is Zulosai, an other, and then the reality, right, of getting close to God. So in Olam Haba, which is the future world, that's a constant change of existential states. You see? It's not like you get to Olam Haba, the future world, right, and you remain that way. No. You actually change from nanosecond to nanosecond because you are getting closer to your Or Pnimi, which is Ein Sof. It's very interesting, you see. So That's what you can look forward to, you see, is getting closer and closer to Ein Sof, you see. So we begin to realize that the distinction between existential states is not quantitative, means amount, it's qualitative. It's different quality, you see. Now we can all ask, what does all this have to do with Lag BaOmer? And within this context, we can now begin to see what Lag BaOmer really is and what it really commemorates, you see. So for that, we have to begin to think in terms of what happened, you see. Now, I had mentioned that something fundamental happened, and now we can understand it much deeper. Adam was in the world of Geshem, physicality. So you can almost think about, it's almost like he was a body of pure energy. In other words, he was physical because even energy is physical, right? It's part of the physical world. But it's certainly not matter. It certainly doesn't look physical, you know? If you think about it, radio waves. A radio wave is not spiritual, but you can't see it, right? You can't touch it, you can't smell it, right? Yet it's clearly physical because it can be picked up by a radio or television, whatever. The whole concept of transmission of electromagnetic radiation, which is energy. So in a certain sense, just think that it's a good way of analyzing it, picturing it, is that Adam is a body of pure energy. Then all of a sudden Adam becomes matter, which is very interesting. That Adam becomes matter, which means that he becomes much more physical. So he's still part of the physical world, you see, but he becomes physical, really physical, our type of physicality, you see. No good. So he goes from the world of Geshem, pure, let's use the description, pure energy, so to speak. I'm using this only as a mashal, as a metaphor. We don't really know what he was, but it's a good metaphor, right? And he becomes matter, which is physical, but what a difference. You know, matter is so much grosser than pure energy, you see. Now the problem is now that Adam is contaminated. He's now contaminated because his world of physicality is now, like I said, contaminated or intermingled with the Zoyamor. And what makes him into matter is Zoyamor, you see. So Zoyamor is a very peculiar type of item. It can change somebody who's pure energy, and that's a physical being. It can change him into a matter being, a substance. This is what Zoyamor does, and that is considered a pollutant, you see. So the trick now is to turn man or the world from matter into pure energy, you see. But the only way to do that is you got to get rid of the Zoyamor. The Zoyamor is that substance that does it. You know, I'm reminded when I think about that, there is a particle, the Higgs boson. I don't know if people ever heard of the Higgs boson, but it was discovered, I think, in 2012, July 4th, actually, I think, 2012 or something like that. Or was it 2014? I don't remember. But anyway, the Higgs boson is some type of particle that is responsible for changing energy into matter. It's astounding. They discovered that with the atom smasher in Zurich, or in Switzerland, whatever. And without that particle, right, matter, energy cannot become matter. You see, it would be interesting if that was the physical component or counterpart to Zoyamor. That would be interesting, because we now know scientifically that energy cannot go into matter unless there's what's called the Higgs field, which is something that surrounds the Higgs boson, which is a particle. Now, they don't know why or how it converts energy into matter, but it's an incredible analogy to Zoyama. And who knows if it's not the Zoyama, very interesting, and it's now been scientifically proven. But anyway, what you have to change matter back into energy, so to speak. I'm using this only as a metaphor. In other words, you got to change, it's the same physical state, but you got to change it back. Very interesting. In any case, so that became the purpose. So what God wanted is that in 10 generations from Adam, right, is that the 10 spheres would magnify themselves, right, and they would produce much more divine energy, and they would remove the physicality or the zoyama in 10 generations. That's what was supposed to be. And then if that happens, then we know that the first orpanimi, the first internal light, right, would then become visible. And according to Adam, who is now contaminated, that first physical light is what? Right? That first physical light is pure energy, or rather Geshem, pure Geshem. That's really what it is. And he wanted that done. But the problem is that after 10 generations, the world sinned terribly, right? Increasing, if you want to use that analogy, which is really a very good analogy, increasing the amount of physicality or matter on energy, much worse. So therefore, instead of being redeemed, which means to expose the inner structure, the orpanimi, right, the inner light, right, and then exposing that inner light, and then removing all that contamination and becoming a pure being, right, that energy, or that the spheres rain down the ore, but that ore, instead of being a divine energy, became the physical analog, you see, which is water. Because the world was filled with what? Zoyama. So when Zoyama now encircles, right, the world of pure Geshem, guess what? It actually changed the Or Pnimi, which is the Or Rishon, the Messianic light. It actually changed it into water. Water is a physical analog, right, of the Or Pnimi. That's what its physical analog is, by the way, and so on. So therefore, since the Or Pnimi of the spheres came down, right, which is the energy that's able to make the world into Geshem, came down, and that itself became physicalized and became water. And guess what? It drowned the entire planet. Because that's really what was supposed to happen initially. You see, where we're supposed to bring the light to the entire planet and make it a world of pure Geshem, get rid of the Zoyama. Instead, that Or Pnimi itself became Geshem, Zoyama, I should say, and drowned the entire world. And you can see that because it says that the waters came down from the windows of heaven, right? And from the deep abyss of the earth, right? What is that supposed to mean? What water from the windows of heaven, right? And waters from the deep abyss? Well, there you are. That's the Or Pnimi, right, coming out and become physicalized into water, and it pervaded the entire earth, and that was the Mabel. You see. And this, by the way, very important idea, was supposed to happen on Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Why? Because Yud Aleph Cheshvan, the 11th day of Cheshvan, is 41 days after Rosh Hashanah. Basically, you see, from Aleph Tishrei, when Adam was created, you see. And we know that things transform in 40 days. Right? Like it says, 40 days before that it takes 40 days to go from conception to Yetziras Avlad, to a human being. It takes 40 days. 40 days is always a period of time that takes for a transformation to occur. So therefore, from Aleph Tishrei to Yud Aleph Cheshvan is 40 days, and Yud Aleph Cheshvan is the 41st. That's why, right, that transformation from Geshem Zoyam slash Zoyam world was supposed to be transformed to what? To pure Geshem world. But it did anyway. So it was transformed. Now that's the first idea. Why it's Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Second idea is that it wasn't Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Why? Because Mr. Shelach died. Because he died, God did not want to interfere or interrupt or disrupt the Shiva for Mr. Shelach, right? So as a result of that, he pushed it off to the day the Mabul did come, which is from the 17th, 18th day. That's when it really came down. So the actual day it came down was the 17th, or rather the 18th day of Cheshvan, right? And it should have come down 7 days earlier, which is Yud Aleph Cheshvan. So what should have come down, which is very important, is a redemption, a tikkun of the entire creation, which never happened. You see. So that's a very, very important idea. You see. Now, Rachel Imenu, right, was born on that day. I should say, Rachel Imenu died on Yud Aleph Cheshvan, because that day indicates what she did. She was involved in the redemption of Klal Yisrael. And Rachel Imenu, of course, is the mother of Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef. So Yosef was given the task to fight the Zoyama. That's really what his job is. You see, Mashiach ben David, his job is to rule after the transformation. But to bring about the transformation is the job of Mashiach ben Yosef. You see, and that's a very important concept. So Rachel Imenu therefore died on that day to indicate that was her task. Because of her merit, the Jewish people, their exile ended, and God said it'll only be for what, 70 years, whatever, and then they will come back with Persia and so on. So Rachel Imenu is considered the mother of the redemption for all the Jews. So obviously, the redemption means what? Redemption means to restore, transform the existential state of one world to another. That's the Orpnimi. To reveal the Orpnimi, the internal structure, right, is the redemption. And that was the job of Rachel and her descendants, you see. So that's why she died on Yud Aleph. Now, Klal Yisrael realizes that. They realize this concept, you see. So they commemorate her day. Why? Because Yud Aleph Cheshvan, that day that she died, commemorates the redemption itself. The transformation, you see, from one existential state, which is the world of Geshem slash Zoyama, to another existential state, which should have been the world of Geshem. That's really what it should have meant, you see. So we now understand the Mabul, and we understand what happened, and we understand what Rachel really did. She is involved in transformations. That's redemption. You see? So therefore, this is, what is going on. So therefore, the Jewish people intuitively realize, even though they don't consciously realize, but they intuitively realize that she is the mother of redemption, and therefore they will commemorate her yahrzeit, which is Yud Aleph Cheshvan. Very important idea. Now, secondly, we now understand what Rachel, her yahrzeit, commemorates, right? The redemption itself. Remember what the redemption is. The redemption is nothing more than a transformation of one existential state to another, you see. But the redemption represents something else. It represents the exposure or the revelation of the Orpnimi, the internal light or structure of that particular existential state, right? Whatever it is, you see. And for that, we now have the second individual, which is Rab Shimon. Now, there is an argument in the Gemara, by the way. When did creation happen? Did it happen on the first day of Tishrei? and therefore the Mabul would have been on the actual Mabul would have been on the 18th day of Cheshvan. It should have been on the 11th day, 40 days after Rosh Hashanah. Then there's Rabbi Yeshua, who says no, the creation didn't happen on the first day of Tishrei. It happened, Adam was created when? On the first day of Nisan. That's what he holds, right? And if that's the case, that means if it happened on first day of Nisan, that would mean that the Mabul happened when? On the 17th, 18th day of Iyar. You see, that's when it happened. Iyar, not Cheshvan. So therefore, what that would have meant, the Mabul, again, is an attempt to restore, right, a transformation, which didn't happen. Instead, the earth was flooded. So on that day, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died, because the 18th day of Iyar is Lag BaOmer. Now, what's interesting about Lag BaOmer is that the Sefira that we read on that day is Hoid Shebahoid. You see, Hoid is majesty of majesty. The majesty is what? Torah Sheba'al Peh is the majesty of God, because that expresses His will. You see, now Hoid Shebahoid, which is majesty of the majesty, is the inner concept. Again, it's the opnimi of the majesty. So what is the majesty of the oral law, which is the Hoid? It is the opnimi, the inner light, or the inner structure of the oral law. And what is that? That is a different type, right, of light. So the Hoid Shebahoid, which is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, that is its Sefira. So that represents the Opnimi. And on that day, Lag BaOmer, 33rd day of the Omer, which is the 18th day of Iyar, is the yahrzeit, right? We commemorate the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You see, because he represents what? He's the one who wrote the Zohar. Now, what the Zohar is a very important concept. The Zohar is surface opnimi. That's really what it is. See, what is interesting is Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was on the mountain receiving the Torah, so he received also the opnimi of the world of pure Geshem, right? That's what he received, the world of pure Geshem. You see, it's opnimi. The problem was the Jews did the Chet Egel, and that was represented by the Luchas, the first tablets. The first tablets were not like the second. The first tablets were laws that really expressed the opnimi. That's why it had many miraculous features. So that was the first Luchas, and that's what he had in his hand. But when the Jews sinned at the golden calf, he took those tablets and he threw it down the mountain. You see, why? Because since the Jews did the sin of the golden calf, right? So what they did is they reinserted the Zoyama again, because when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai, right, after hundreds of years in Egypt, they actually had removed the Zoyama from their body. In other words, the Zoyama was still there, but it was not operative, you see. And that was the beginning of its extraction or its eviction. Had they not done the Chet Egel, then the Satan would have been killed. The Zoyama would have been evicted from physical matter, and the whole universe would have had an existential change, transformation. Instead, what happened is they did the sin, which automatically means that they strengthened the Zoyama back to be operative in the physical world, sort of like remaining as matter, right? So then what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He can't transform, a world from Geshem slash Zoyama into a world of Geshem, pure Geshem, because they solidified the Zoyama much greater. So he had to make a decision. Is he going to give God back the tablets? Because the Jews cannot have it. The world cannot be transformed into another existential state. So he decided on a brilliant solution. You see, what he did is he broke them, and then they took all the shards, the pieces of the broken Luchos Rishonos, the first tablets, and what he did is he put them in the Oren, behind the Luchos Shniyos, behind the second tablets. You see, that's what he did. And what he did, therefore, is save the Jewish people in many ways. Because had he given back the first tablets, which are the Opnimi from the world of Zoyamah, right? Had he given it back to God, which we would think he should have done, then the Jews would never have access at all to any form from the Opnimi, from the concealed or the inner light. Nothing. They wouldn't know anything about it. But by breaking it into pieces and he put it into the Oren, therefore, even though you couldn't read them, so therefore the world is not transformed because they're all broken, the first tablets, right? What he did is he allowed the Jews, it became available, you see, became available to the Jewish people, at least the pieces were available. So therefore what's called a shefa, the divine energy of those first tablets, remained with the Jews. And that enabled, by the way, Kabbalah to be exposed to the Jewish people. And from that, Reb Shimon ultimately wrote the Zohar. So the Zohar really is what? It's a description of all the different existential states and how they operate. That's what the Zohar really is. It's the description of those states and the interactions of those states and how God interacts with those states itself. You see, so Reb Shimon was able to write the Zohar, right, which is the surface of the Opnimi, because of what Moshe Rabbeinu did. You see, but what Reb Shimon did is, right, is he wrote about the Opnimi. So that's the second aspect of the redemption. What Rachel did, she actually brought about the redemption in her merit, right? And the redemption is the transformation itself, you see. So at least the first exile was only for 70 years. That is a transformation. And what Reb Shimon did is he exposed or revealed the Opnimi of the first Luchos, which is basically the surface, right? And that is the Zohar. So we commemorate that aspect of the redemption, you see? So that's a very, very important idea. And that tells us really why we commemorate Reb Shimon, right, at all with bonfires. Because that's the essence of Reb Shimon, is fire, is light. It's the light of the Opnimi that he revealed in the Zohar, you see. And that is Messianic, you see. So it's interesting that even though the Jews don't, people don't realize in many ways what Reb Shimon is, we're not really commemorating Reb Shimon, although that's what it looks like. We are commemorating what Reb Shimon stands for, his symbol. And his symbol is the light, the actual, light, the inner Opnimi, the inner light of the what reality is when you change the world from a Geshem Zoyama world, you transform it, right, to a Geshem, pure Geshem world. That's really what the essence is of Lag BaOmer. You see, it's very, very important idea. So Lag BaOmer is really the beginning of a transformation. Now, if you really think about that, when Moshe Rabbeinu threw down the Luchos Rishonos, right, which is the first part, the first tablets, right, he really, by allowing the Opnimi from the world of Geshem Zoyama to the world of pure Geshem, right, he really allowed a certain partial transformation. Although the world didn't change, but there was a revelation of the light, and that is a partial redemption. See, that's what he did. Even though the Jews did the sin of the golden calf. So Rabbi Shimon, what the Moshe Rabbeinu did was astounding, and Rabbi Shimon is the one who did it. You see, so there was, in a certain sense, a partial transformation. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon dies when? He dies on the day that there should have been a transformation. According to Rabbi Yeshua, that day, the Mabul was on the 18th day of Iyar. And that's when you should have had the transformation, right? So Rabbi Shimon, he actually revealed part of that, the Or Pnimi. So he died on that day. So it comes out that on both of them, on Rochel Imeinu, right, we commemorate, right, the actual existential change or transformation that she is responsible for. You know, and part of that was partial, because the Golus is a partial transformation, right? When Jews are not in exile, that is a partial transformation, right? From control by the Zoyama, the Satan, to non-control. Because that's really what Golus is. Golus is an intensification of the control of the Zoyama, of the Satan, of the Jewish people. So Rochel ended the Golus, the first Golus in that sense, you know, of Bovel and so on, right? She ended that, and as a result of that, that is a partial transformation. Partial. So we commemorate that she should use her merits to continue that process and complete the entire transformation. And with Reb Shimon, that he should also, we commemorate that he did it, and that he should reveal the total Or Pnimi from, you know, what it should be. But remember, even after all of them, it's only the first redemption. It's the Or Pnimi of the first redemption. It's an existential transformation of the first redemption, which is to go from a world of Geshem / Zoyama to a world of what? Pure Geshem. And that's what happens in the Messianic era. That will be the first existential transformation. But then we have the rest of the transformations, right? We have the transformations of the second part, where we go from a world of Geshem, pure energy, to a world of spirituality, which operates on different ideas. It operates under different conditions. And then we begin to see changes in reality. You know where we see this from? There's a fascinating medrash at the end of Koheles, you see, that says the following. I've mentioned this before, but we understand it now in a different context. The medrash says the following, that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is what? Which is everything we have, right? The Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Sifrei, there's Mechilta, Tosefta, Brises, right? All the Tshuvas Forum, thousands and thousands. Then there's the Rishonim, the Achronim, Shulchan Aruch. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Sforim that were written. All of this is Torah's Moshe. But Torah's Moshe is a description of what? It's really a description of how to get out of the world of Zoyama, or rather Geshem / Zoyama, into a world of pure Geshem. You know, Adam HaRishon didn't have this. He didn't need it, because he was now in the world of Geshem Zoyama, right? So he didn't need Taryag mitzvahs the way we have it. We need the Taryag. That's really what the second Luchas are, you see? So that's what we needed. So that's Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. It is a world specifically directed or aimed at a world of Geshem / Zoyama. You see? Get rid of the Zoyama and into a world of pure Geshem. That's why in the Messianic era, it's all about pure Geshem. You see? Now, once that happens, we have other realities. It doesn't end there, except it ends after 6,000 years. Then starting from 2240, the English year 2240, which is the year 6,000, right? It now changes. We actually change what's called Zikuch. That is the beginning of the end, right, of the physical world in general. And we become spiritual. We go into from the 6th to the 7,000th year. we actually begin to change, and the world changes, right? From a physical world, from Olam Asiyah to Olam Yetzirah. That's 6 to 7,000. Then from 7 to 8, we change into world of Bria. Then from 8 to 9, we change into the world of Atzilus. That's what it's called, right? And all of this is Olam Hazeh. But we're still not in Olam Haba. It takes 9,000 years to make the change of all these realities. Because the spiritual domain is 3 worlds. You see? Whereas the physical domain is only one. It has different parts. Icholos, whatever. But it's still different parts. So it takes 3,000 years to go 3 worlds. But then we get to the 9,000. Like it says in the Torah, Viho Asiri, and the 10,000th year, which is 9,001, Yiyeh Kodesh. There will be what? There will be holiness. That is the beginning where we no longer are neither energy or matter. It's over with, you see, and we actually change from a spiritual world into a completely different type of being. Why? Well, I should say how. Because the Or Pnimi of Olam Haba has nothing to do with any of Olam Hazeh. The world of Olam Haba, the Or Pnimi, the inner light or inner structure of Olam Haba, is the Ein Sof. You see, it's God as He is represented by the Ein Sof, the Infinite One. That is its Or Pnimi, you see. And what happens is, in that world, we don't even know what we are. The world of Zulosai, which is other than Ein Sof, which is the world of the Neshama, we have no idea really who we are and what we are. You see, and that's the last existential transformation. But like I said, that transformation continues on and on, you see. Now I was saying the Medrash. So the Medrash says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, it says an incredible thing. It says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu is Hevel, is air, Luft, air, nothing compared to the Torah of Mashiach. And then it says that the Torah of Mashiach, which I've been describing, right, is nothing, is Hevel compared to the Torah of Olam Haba. Now what does that mean? Does that mean there's more learning going on? I'm sure there is, but that's not the meaning of Hevel. Hevel means that there is such a difference between these types of ore, of Torah, that it's not even a substance. It's nothing. Now, that's not a quantitative change, more information. It's a qualitative change. It's something which is completely different. You see? It's like the difference between energy and matter. Even though they're both physical, but they're 2 different kinds of beings. You see, that's what the Medrash is alluding to. The difference between existential changes that take place is not a matter of quantity. It's a different universe. You see, it's like the comparison is, imagine, nobody ever heard of bacteria or the microscopic world until Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope, right? And he took a look and he couldn't believe there's an entire micro world that we can't even imagine. I mean, these things don't even look human, obviously. You look at bacteria, you look at algae, and so on, they don't look human, right? The nano world, the world of atoms and molecules, chemicals and so on, right? And even the world, like I said, of living substances, they don't look normal. You see, it's like an entirely different universe that is below ours, that we can't even see unless you put a lens in front of it. You see, that's an example I would use. The reality of Olam Haba compared to Olam Hazeh, we can't even, there's no way to understand. That's why the Gemara says, Ayin lo yirah, the eye has never beheld, right? What is stored up for tzaddikim in Olam Haba. Nobody knows. We can imagine Gan Eden, because Gan Eden is not Olam Haba. Gan Eden is an exposure to the Or Pnimi of the world of Geshem Zoyama, which is the Or Mashiach. That's all it is. But it's not Olam Haba. Nobody knows what Olam Haba is. Nobody. Even the greatest angels have no concept of what it means. You see? So you got to get rid of childish notions, which is amazing what other religions have, what they think the future world is, the world of God. Is not. There's no concept that we can even draw what is going on in that world. Remember, the Or Pnimi, the inner structure of Olam Haba, is the Ein Sof. Could you imagine what that means? It's beyond belief. And therefore, what changes is not only a different reality, but it's a different consciousness. We will have a different consciousness than we have now. Right now, compared to what is then, Olam Haba is nothing more than brain fog. In fact, it's not even that. You can't even begin to imagine what's there. But it's a different awareness, it's a different consciousness, because it's a different reality, you see. So we now understand what Lag BaOmer is, and also what Rochel Imeinu's yahrzeit is. You see, it's nothing more than a day that commemorates, right, an existential transformation of the first type, right, that Reb Shimon is responsible for. You see, that's really what Lag BaOmer is, But this is only the first of them. And like I said, there's another 3. You see? Or what really we can't commemorate because it hasn't happened yet, you see? But that's what Lag BaOmer is. But at least it's an understanding that there is an Or Pnimi, that there is an existential change, you see. So that's really what goes on. It's just that it takes, you see. So that's what you see from the Medrash. That's what the Medrash really means. We're not looking here at a quantitative distinction. We are looking at a qualitative distinction. You see. And therefore, Lag BaOmer is the beginning, is the initial understanding of what's about to happen. And certainly we hope that Tufshin Pei Gimel, and maybe even tonight or tomorrow, since it commemorates the Or Rishon, which is the Messianic light, which is the beginning, the first transformation. Look, let's hope it happens today, tonight, tomorrow, right? But certainly that it should happen this year, So in any case, I think we have a much better understanding. We have a much better understanding of what really is going on. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Good.
Okay, so when we're doing, let's say, a physical activity, whether it's a mitzvah or anything physical, when we connect ourselves to the spirituality of it, meaning like by inviting Hashem, or give an example of the mitzvah of mikveh, the physical thing that we have to go dip in the mikveh. But when we connect it to the mitzvah and the intention behind it, and we have that connection, spirituality with Hashem involved in the mitzvah, are we connecting ourselves to the Or Pnimi of that physical activity?
I didn't really understand the question. Could you?
Okay. When you do something physically, it could be anything. It could even be exercise, whatever it could be.
Right.
But you connect yourself to the spiritual part of it, meaning I'm doing it to be able to be healthy and to do more mitzvot, and you're connecting yourself to Hashem within the physical activity.
Right.
So when you connect the physical and the spiritual together, are you connecting yourself to the Or Pnimi of that situation, of that moment?
The answer is yes. You know why? Because as I will say in a future shiur, whatever, because the neshama itself has 5 parts. And the interesting thing about those 5 parts is that each one is connected to a different reality. So because you are essentially 5 parts, whenever you do an action, whether it be thinking, speaking, or doing, right, you are automatically connecting, right, to the opnimi of different worlds. So it's really one continuous connection because of the way the neshama is arranged. You see. So the answer to that would be yes, because of the distinct and unique type of connection that you have to the opnimi, right, from a soul level. Because your neshama is the opnimi ultimately of everything, right? That is what the neshama is. It's the opnimi, the entity that is connected to all creation. You see, and actually, if I will tell you something which is very interesting, but it needs a great elaboration. The world itself is an extension of you. We don't realize that. The world is an extension of the neshama. We don't know how or mystically, but it is. You see that in a certain concealed way. You see, the concept of, for instance, of possessions, which you own. You don't own something only because it's legal, because all society recognizes that you can control the object. No, you own that because that object that you own is an extension of you, what's called ontologically. For instance, somebody talks Lashon Hara, right, and he gets saras, which is a skin discoloration, right, so it first attacks his house. Why his house? What does a guy's house have to do with him? And the answer, that house is really an extension of your being, which we have no concept of. In fact, that's really what the world is. It's an extension of who you are, you see. And there's even a remez in science to this. It's called that man determines that one universe, the universe itself knows everything going on within itself. That if you have a light wave in one end of the universe, it actually knows that you're going to watch it. Even science, the anthropic principle, that all reality is determined by the mind of man. But how can that be? And the answer is because the whole universe, mystically, is an extension of the neshama. So the answer to your question, of course, is yes. Because it's you. Anyway.
So that's like what they say, is that like how you manifest your reality through your thoughts?
Yes. Yeah. Right.
So then I have a question. How could we access those higher worlds through the Orpnimi? Like how? What?
There are. The Rabbi Vital wrote a book called Shari Kedusha, and in that book he actually talks about how you can access phenomena, I should say, of Olam Asiyah. He talks that it is possible. We can't be prophets, which I'll talk about someday. And we can't have the real Ruach Kodesh. That's not really what we have. But we can have prophetic dreams. We can have Gililio. We can access Shadim, whatever, and spirits and all that. Ilam Hazeh, or I should say in Ilam Asiyah. So that we can do, But there are prescribed ways. A lot of it has to do with your understanding, not you personally, but with the understanding of the concept of meditation. A lot of this is done through meditating on divine names. But you have to know what meditation is. It's interesting to give a shiur on the whole concept of meditation, which I have. I have a whole bunch of shiurim on that, how to meditate, what does it mean, what to meditate on. But there are phenomena that you can actually make available to yourself by doing the proper procedures. And one of them, of course, is ruchnis. Avodah. If you do the mitzvahs with the proper intent, right, then you will access the kedusha or the shefa of that opnimi. Right, that's available.
So through doing the mitzvahs with the right intention,
Right.
You could get access to one level higher.
Right, yeah. I mean, take a look at the classic example. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. I mean, the man clearly had Ruach Kodesh. But it was even more than that. It almost looked like, it wasn't the Nevuah, but it was a very high order of Ruach Kodesh. He knew. And he himself didn't know why he knew. But what enabled him to access it was his tremendous Kedusha, his tremendous Limud HaTorah, and his tremendous holiness. So he had access to divine information that nobody has today. It's terrible that he's missed, But how did he do it? I mean, he wasn't a particular oived. He was an unbelievable shomer halachas and limud Torah. He was incredible. He was completely devoted. So because he was completely devoted, he didn't even live in our world. I mean, if you read biographies about him, it's astounding. He didn't really know what was going on in that sense. Yet he knew more what was going on than people who are involved in these things. So yeah, that's the way to do it. Follow the Mesilas Yesharim. That's the key. Ramchal wrote a whole book on that. I always think that Ramchal is the same letters as Mei Rochel, from Rochel. If you jumble the words Ramchal, it spells Mei Rochel, the same letters, because in many ways his neshama is yahrzeit should be yahrzeit. He died on the which is coming up, by the way. He died on the 26th day of Iyar. The yahrzeit should be yahrzeit. And the Isis Ramchal is Mei Rochel, because he was an Inyan of Yosef. He was probably either a Nitzitz or a Shurish of Mashiach ben Yosef. Anything else?
Yeah. So does the Or Pnimi, is that the energy that runs through the Sefirot?
Is the Or what?
The Or Pnimi.
What about it?
That's the energy that runs through the Sefirot?
Well, the Or Pnimi is the configuration, right, of a certain set of basic principles that are the determinants of expressions, manifestations. So the origin of the Or Pnimi is obviously always the spheres. In fact, that's really what the study of Kabbalah is. It is a study of the configurations that determine different phenomenon or phenomena, you see. Right.
So what is it? The Hod Shebehod, which is Lag BaOmer.
Just 1 second. How do you shut it off?
There's a button in the back. It says start stop. Just push that.
Where?
In the back, there's a button that says start stop. You just push that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what were you saying?
So the Hod Shebehod, which is the day of Lag BaOmer in the
Right.
Why is it that configuration specifically?
Well, like I mentioned, Hod, is a majesty. It represents the Torah Shabbat Peh. And the Hod of the Hod, which is the majesty of the majesty, the essential majesty, is the Or Pnimi. Because that's its essential determinant. Because that's what gives rise to the second level of Or. But the first level is always the framework itself. It's like when you look at a substance, you look at its molecular structure. The atomic structure, right? The atomic structure is the Or Pnimi of the molecular structure. And the molecular structure is the Or Pnimi of the compound. And the compound is the molecular structure of the mixture. You see? See how it works? Each one goes higher and higher. It becomes more and more complicated. But if you really want to get down to the bottom, then go reverse. You have mixture into compound, into molecules, into atoms, and even from then you go into quarks, etc. That's what each thing has a substructure that forms its essential ingredient. Same thing. There are many Or Pnimis, and that's what I was trying to bring out. The Lag BaOmer is the introduction to the world of the Or Pnimi. You see? And of course we point to Reb Shimon.
Right.
Okay.
So we were talking We were talking about the number 40, right?
Right.
How anything changes, but why the number 40? And like even with prayers, we say 40 days, or they say if you want to make a character change within yourself, do it for 40 days. Why 40?
I imagine you can answer different questions, but 40 would be, 30 plus 10. I say that because the first 30 needs what's called the origins. And the origins, the first 3 spheres are, every sphere has 10 subspheres. So the first 30 would be Kessin, Chochmah, and Bina. Those are called the upper 3, and they are the moichen, the brains of the lower 7. And then the first of the 7 is Chesed, and that's 10. So 40 would be a complete set of moichen, which is the origin itself, the determinants, and then the first entry into the lower 7, which would be Chesed, which is 10. And there you have 40. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Great.
Good.
I think that sounds pretty logical. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody should enjoy Lag BaOmer, but you should think about the real meaning, that you're looking at the beginning of the Opnimi. Okay, we'll meet again hopefully next week. See you then.